recording it and will mute myself.
Well, I'm a great fan of Florida tales, and there are so many that might lend themselves well. One goes back a century ago to a time when Florida had just been acquired by the United States. The Spanish had given up and pulled away. And so people began to flood into northern Florida from the plantation colonies in Carolina and Georgia. And immigrants even found their way from farther north, from New York and strange places like that. It was a time, the very beginning of great tribulations in Ireland. It was the beginning of the time of starvation and hardship. And so Irish families found their way to the New World. And among those, they found their way to Florida, those very earliest of the Irish flood. One such family was from Mayo. A father, a mother, and a lovely little girl. They settled in by a spring in central Florida, about 2 hours from where I live right on Tampa Bay, northwest of Orlando and east of the Gulf of Mexico. That was pretty much of a strange and wild place in those days. But it was being settled quickly. There began to be towns of 60, 90, 100, even 300 people. Well settled. And there were settlers who came down from those plantation rich areas in the Carolinas and Georgia, moneyed, educated, sophisticated, coming down to grab up land and build a future, run businesses, coming to build fortunes upon the fortunes they already had. Well, the little girl from Mayo, her mother soon acquired a Florida fever and died, leaving the girl to be raised by her hard-working father. And the rich son of a planter from the southern coast of America built his business and raised a family. Had a good-looking son who was bright and quick and took to education and took to his father's business acumen. One day, by this spring, this little town that was there, the young lad, sophisticated, well-dressed, beautiful horse team, fancy leather boots, was introduced by chance to an Irish lass from a poor family. Now, this particular lass from County Mayo had hair so red, it grew redder as she grew older and now is in her late teens. When she went down to the local spring and a great pond of a lake that surrounded it, and she bathed in the early dawn light, her red hair glowed second only to the sun. Her skin was like fresh drawn milk. Her eyes so green you couldn't help but think of the hills of Ireland. Her voice was soft. It had a musical quality. All who knew her loved her profoundly. She wasn't very tall. Her hands and feet were really quite small, as was her waist. But between shoulders and waist, she'd become quite a woman. So when the young man with his well, well, well endowed purse, this young man with his fabulous education, his good looks, his good dressing, oh, so perfect he was. He saw her, he fell instantly in love. Oh, his heart just absolutely palpitated. And so he began a courtship. At first, she wanted nothing to do with him. She realized the difference in class. But finally, he won her over, and their hands touched as they sat by the shores of the waters of the spring. He proposed, and she denied him. And then another night, he proposed again, and she finally relented. They were a perfect looking couple. And they matched up in personality because although she was not educated, she was probably much brighter than he. So they got along fabulously. The young man went back to his father and he told him of his plans to wed the young lass from Mayo. And the father, a man from the old deep south, was livid. You'll not marry that Irish trash. Have you no sense, my son? They're papists. And so the bickering, the fighting, the quarreling began. Back and forth the father went, the young man and his loving young woman still met. Finally, the young man's father devised a plan. He called in his son and he said, all right, I have relented. But to further your business education, I want you to go and do a task I've been planning to do in England. Go there and handle the purchase of this company for buying products from our plantation in Georgia and in Carolina to buy our cotton. And if you do, when you return, if you are successful, I will give my blessings to your marriage because I know you will be successful. So the young man went. And he sent letter after letter after letter to his love, all of which were intercepted by agents of the young man's father. And so she pined and mourned and grew lonelier and lonelier and lonelier, and she wept. Oh, she was so depressed, and she began to fail. She began to lose weight. She began to grow lame. She was always in tears and always alone. No one could say anything that brightened her day. She felt deserted. She felt all alone. Until finally, one day, she had grown so thin, so pale, so weak. Her aunt found her down by the spring. And she went to her aunt and said, I am going to die. I have talked to God. And I want you to take, when I die, take my body, put it in a boat, row me to the center of the spring. And there, where the water bubbles up from that crack, almost 8 foot wide, from which the waters from the very center of the earth come up to boil their way to the top. Place my body but be sure that this golden bracelet that my love gave to me is secured well to my wrist, so it will go with me to eternity. The ant cried, no, no, no way I'll do that. And finally, the young girl passed, falling dead on the shores of the spring. The ant, yielding to her request, put her in the rowboat, rowed her to the center of the springs, securely fastened the golden gift from her lover to her wrist, gently moved the body to the water, where it slowly sank, the red hair flowing, flickering, flickering, waving in the water as she sank down into that box from which comes the bubbling, boiling spring. Her white, now even whiter skin, shimmering as it sank in the moonlight through the very crystal clear waters of the spring. And just at that time, the young man who had returned from London had come to his father's house, and they had decided that on a beautiful night like this, they would take a boat out on the spring waters, drink champagne, and toast to his coming wedding. And they did, in time to see the ant in great tears on her little dark old wooden rowboat, her face contorted in the pain of one in grief. And they came to it. The young man looked down through these crystal clear waters, and there he could see the red hair, the white skin, the golden bracelet that actually seemed to drift up at one end. He was overwhelmed. He dived from his boat. He swam down, 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 down. He grabbed the bracelet. He pulled it up. He grabbed her arm. He wrapped his arms around her. He gave her an embrace as the boiling waters came up around them and they sank down into that great crevasse. And then it seemed as though the very walls of that stone crevasse closed in on them. The only bubbling waters came from a small opening. All above were amazed, terrified, wept, they dived, they cried. There was nothing. The crevasse had closed. All wept, all grieved. Years later, people would swim to the springs. They would dive, they would play, they would cavort, and there where the crevasse had reopened a little, small white flowers grew under the water. The girls in the area now send their boyfriends to collect as gifts of true love. And so it's said that the boy's father, who died long after in grief, can still be seen near Devil's Springs, pulling behind him a long chain of heavy gold.